So, well, last week we discussed sin. So I hope you all did your homework. Don't tell me you led a good life this last week. No, we spent a whole hour and a half talking about sin, and then you couldn't jump in. The key to both of these things about purgatory and the afterlife of the heavenly kingdom is self-will. What do we choose to do? The whole thing seems to be, as Karl Rahner, the great one of the great theologians of Vatican II, said, it is our own personal choices. And we talked about the words like of a fundamental option, which is that you have a continuity. It is not a single action type thing. It's not like you can do one thing and then all of a sudden that colors your life. Sadly, very sadly, been involved with funerals of suicides of young people. And the thought came into my mind, along with all of the other things that can be talked about in terms of suicide. The Catholic Catechism has a wonderful section on, because it's very understanding. It gives you several paragraphs. The first paragraph is, we do not take human life lightly, and therefore it is a very serious obligation to maintain our life. And to get very clear that there can be circumstances, mitigating circumstances, because of the confusion they had. Just, are you ready for this? Dr. Phil this morning, you say, where do I get all my insights into humanity? Well, not James and John and Peter and all those people. They lived at a different time. I pay attention to Dr. Phil. So they had one of these terribly sad mornings. A woman who had 3 boys, and the middle one was 11 years old, and joyful and as happy and pleasant as can be, all involved in all kind of sports, very active. And he went into a little bit of a kind of a blank out period, only to find out that some girl had written him with instructions on how to commit suicide. So he popped up the stairs that night. He came down for a little snack and popped up the stairs, got into his own room. His mom thought everything was safe, and they came in the morning, and he had came in that night, and he had hung himself. So, where did that come from? And it came from, the immaturity of choice that people can make. So the analogy that came to my mind was, you do not judge the film by the final cell, the final moment of the film. Is not the whole thing. I'm not making any whitewashing of what suicide is, but the thing of bipolar disorders will list for you, along with medications and other type things, a series of consequences of bipolar, and one of them is suicide. So it's just listed right there. It's saying, well, you have this, and suicide, and this, and this. So anyway, what we're talking about here is self-will. It has to be, in order for it to be sinfulness, it has to be willful, and it has to be knowledgeable. And it cannot be a mistake as much as, I went to the grocery store and I wanted to get this instead I got that. But it has to be something where I'm choosing actually to walk away from God. And it depends on what your distance is in walking away from God as to its severity. So these type of things go back to the early church. And we took Pope Francis' article as part of one of his things about sin and about the Pelagianism and Gnosticism, both of which come down pretty much to the same thing, which is, I am in charge and no one's going to tell me otherwise. I might go to the philosophers or to this, that, the other thing to find out what I should do in life, but I'm not going to pay any, nobody's going to tell me what to do. I had a student write that to me one time in one of his essays, because I did most of my teaching by essay work. Thinking Man's Project in a boys' school or Thinking Person's Project in a co-ed school. And he said, I'm not going to pay attention to anybody who's, walking around in a skirt, talking about a religious habit or the alb of a priest or something. I'm not going to have anybody tell me what to do. So, well, okay. So you can do whatever you darn well please. Well, that's it. So we look for guidance somehow in this life. So we took Cinda's. Did anybody have any questions or observations they want to make before we move on to our next program here? I did give you quite a bit of reading on this sinful thinking. 5 Catholic lives. So anyway, and then we have this poem on page 8 of session 18. You're the blessing we'll never know. And this was actually written by one of our own parishioners who was deceased this last year, Tom Stalmach. You might recall having seen him sometimes play the guitar at some of our functions. A very devout man, very devout, constantly every day taking in large sections of meditation, especially on a series of volumes he had that was written by a mystic woman on Mary and the Jesus function through Mary. Anyway, he wrote this. You're the blessing we'll never know. As you know, in the latest bill to go through Congress, $380-some million was given to Planned Parenthood to conduct their business. And then another bunch of millions was given to countries around the world so that they can continue abortions, such as Mexico and places in Africa. And, we want to get rid of them. And then, and then, along with the equal, whatever it is they're calling it, bill, there are things in there which could be the end of some areas of Catholicism. Because it deals with that all people will have to, in hospitals, perform abortions, and all people have to participate. So you don't get that exclusion clause that you used to have, called the Hyde Amendment, which says that you do not, as a hospital person, be forced to do abortions, and nor do hospitals. Like you couldn't go to, one of the Catholic hospitals around. 20% of the hospitals in the United States are Catholic, and say you have to do abortions. Well, now that seems to be what the aim of this new thing is. Part of it is there is an underlying attitude towards Catholicism and its stances, and the quicker they could silence all that, the better off the country would be. People say so. This says, now we lay you down to sleep, replay the Lord your soul to keep. Though you're gone before your time, we offer you this lullaby. We long to see your blessings and the gifts we'll never know, like barefoot laughter in the rain, or angels made in snow, like pictures of a home with love, or refrigerator doors, or a tiny voice saying, who could ask for more? Oh, 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 just your tiny voice saying, who could ask for more? I'd like to hug and kiss your cheek and hold you in my arms, to dream of all you could be and keep them all from harm. But as we'll never feel the touch of tiny hands to change our hearts and heal our wounded land. Oh, 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 change our hearts and heal our wounded land. So anyway, it goes in. So this is a reality to us. So we're not just talking about interpreting scripture and looking at text. We're taking it a culture. And the culture is profound. And once you get into the culture, it becomes much easier. It could have been shocking for you to do something like this, but as it becomes easier, you just find out, well, it's part of the program. So the thing that we're going to do now is we're going to go into the Lazarus section. And you can see it has discussion questions for Lazarus. And Lazarus is in the alignment of John, scene 16. Now, I'm going to show you something here, and it's going to be very difficult for our Zoomers. Sorry, Zoomers, I'm going to do the best I can. You won't be able to read it, but what you can see at least is the thought. And the thought is this. This is a pyramid. And in the pyramid are 21 scenes, not chapters. I know there's 21 chapters. I'm talking about scenes. And you can see the first scene, the reason it's in a pyramid form, matches the last scene. You have people at the riverside here, people at the lakeside here, the same group. You have the wedding feast at Cana, and you have Mary Magdalene using the language of the Song of Songs. Where's my Lord? Where have they taken him? Right from chapter 3 and chapter 9 of the Song of Songs. So it's a wedding type thing. The third one, we just had this on our Sunday thing. Jesus here in John's gospel goes into the temple area, and he goes after the temple people then over here he says destroy this body, and in 3 days I will rebuild it. They thought he's talking about the temple. He's talking about himself. It's a prelude to the resurrection. And sure enough, over here on the right-hand side is the matching parallel, which is the crucifixion of Jesus on the cross. Am I making some sense? That the chiasm, as they call it, is the 21 scenes, and the scenes match up with each other. So when we say 16 for Lazarus, we want to find out what his parallel is. And the parallel is, of all things, the Samaritan woman. And you say, well, how does that get to put together? Well, just take a look at some of the conclusions. First of all, the Samaritan woman becomes a convert, and she runs back in and becomes an apostle to the people in town. And they come out and meet Jesus and say, you have to stay with us 3 more days. What happens in the Lazarus scene is precisely that Lazarus is dead. The woman has been dead, according to our theology, dead because of her sin. And the commentators for generations have always looked down on her as a person of sin, as opposed to the courage that she had to be running right back to the people who ostracized. Remember, she had to go out at noontime, and she couldn't, kind of share in the viviality of the community because she was considered to be and she had married 5 times, which was the exact number of false gods that the Syrians brought with them to intermarry into the Jewish people in the 10 northern parts of the kingdom. I know this is going very fast, but what I'm saying is that the Lazarus section there, and then if that's not enough, we also have, besides this large construct, each of the 5 sections here, let's take this and put it down here, this and put it down here, this and put it down here. So you get 4 different sections of 5s, and they all parallel each other. So that's what this looks like. So in other words, sequence 1 parallels sequence 5, as well as paralleling sequence 17 and 21. You see how that goes? So what you do is you get kind of a thread going through these 4 scenes, and then these 2 scenes, and then the top scene. The top scene down here is destroy this body, and over here is the crucifixion. We know that's a parallel for chapter scene 3 and chapter scene 19. So up on the top you have the pagan believes, the Samaritans, whereas the Pharisees do not believe. You see how clever this is? The whole thing is a construct here with all these. You say, well, how can you keep track of all that? Well, we're dealing with how do you what do you do with somebody who wants to make a jigsaw puzzle? Do you say, well, we'll give you the picture, and then what you cut it all out and stuff like that? No. What you do is you have to, when it's all a big mess and stuff, is you have to put it together so it makes some coherence. So, and this is a giant puzzle, and the writers, because they have a long time, notice I said writers because there's a school that goes with John, and the school helps you with understanding. The final version of John comes out in the 90s, some 60 years after the time of Christ. Luke had been at 85, and Matthew at 80, and Mark at 70. So it took time for these schools because everything was oral in those days. And so to get these texts and things like that put together and to have them kind of polished over years, over decades of study and things like that, you gotta love what goes on there. So, so these are some things. Let's go to number 4 on your page here, where it says discussion questions for Lazarus. It says, because the first top 3 are dealing with just kind of the layout thing that I've just shown you very briefly. Since the element of sin is prominent in the reality before us, death, what would you propose as a spirituality of being deeply disturbed about the fact of sin? How would you make efforts to move forward towards overcoming moments of death and sin? You can be as general or as particular as Spirit takes you. Yeah, well, because this is for discussion about groups, so you don't want to be going into that. So the next one is, Martha speaks the ultimate truth about Jesus. He is the resurrection and the life. How can Catholicism focus on the resurrection from the hollowness of death to the fullness of life as a controlling element of our faith? Remember, as Paul said, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, then we're stupid, the most stupid of people. We've been suckered into it. I hate to use this word, but it's Mount Carmel. Remember the big fire down in Texas, where the people there had sold their souls over to the leader of that branch of stuff, and this was during the Clinton era, and then they shot in things to start some fire, to get some smoke, to get them to come out of the building, but instead it burnt down the building, and dozens upon dozens were killed. It was a whole family, a whole group of things. But see how they were, let's use the tough language, see how they were suckered into all this because of their own emptiness of life, and they didn't have any kind of value system of life, and so they got taken in this. How about Jones down in holy mackerel, in the forest down in northeastern South America with 600 people, and then convincing them that they had to drink the joy juice, that would kill them. Only a few survived and said, I think this might be stupid to be killing ourselves. But the others, oh, yes, that's what we have to do. And so we can, have kind of an attitude that towards life and death that is remote from what God had intended. Now, what you have here on the next page, page 2, is how to read the Lazarus account, scene 16 in the Johannine chiastic form. It says, begin with the big picture. Remember that John has 2 books, the book of signs and the book of glory. There are 7 signs, ending up with resuscitation of Lazarus. Right towards the final scene, Jesus knew that the hour had come, which is the final scene, which is the Lazarus. Now, the church, we're not doing that at our parish, nor are they doing it across the country, but there is in sequence A, there are the last 2 Sundays of Lent are the blind man being cured and Lazarus being brought out of the tomb. Because in the prologue, it said Jesus will bring light and life. So in chapter 9, you have the blind man being brought out. Chapter 11, you have Lazarus being brought out. This Lazarus text is long. It's 44 verses. And only 1 verse does Lazarus come out of the tomb. Verse 44. You're saying, what is happening before that? Well, before that is the whole development of what death is and what resuscitation by Lazarus. But will this be a portend of Jesus' resurrection? Now, keep that in mind, that what we're actually dealing with here with Lazarus is that Lazarus is not the quote-unquote hero or the greatest miracle of the gospel. How could he be the greatest miracle of the gospel when he comes out of the tomb and he's still wrapped up in his cloths of burial? They have to unwind him. What does that signify? It signifies that he's going to have these burial cloths on the shelf so that he can use them again, because he's going to die. When I got to Israel one time, I'm just making this up, but I do that. I went to the phone book and I looked under Lazarus just to see, if I could talk to him. And I knew he'd probably be walking with a cane, but anyway, well, no, there's no Lazarus there. He died again. So this is resuscitation. It's not resurrection. So he's in the tomb 4 days. Those are the days of sure death. 3 days were the days Hosea said, just in one of our daily readings the other day. Hosea says, 3 days is the day of rising up. So we have that. So Jesus is in the tomb 3 days. They had to roll the stone away from Lazarus' tomb because he doesn't have any power. He's dead. And from Jesus, the Holy Spirit blows out the opening to the cave. And not only that, but we have the burial cloths, and we have the 3 days, and we have the stone, and they're all different. That's because Jesus' resurrection is the miracle of the gospel and the miracle of humankind, Jesus rising from the dead. Can you imagine that? That one miracle of Jesus rising from the dead and going back to the Father gives us the goal of creation, which is to bring us to the Father and to bring us out of love to the Father. And so that one particular miracle saved every single, offered, I should say, salvation to every single person from the beginning of humanity to its very end, which we don't know when that will be. It took us billions of years to get to where we're at now. And so just think of the acceleration of evolution, how fast things are going now. 100 years ago, you were out there this morning, kind of rotating, the front of your car with a kind of a screw there, get your Model T going. Chunk, 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 chunk. And then you come down, there wouldn't be any stoplights because why should you stop? Because they're not going that fast anyway. Get out of the way, horse. I'm beep, beep, and so you're moving. That's only 100 years ago that we've gone from there to beautiful cars now. There's some that can't even drive themselves. They're all going to be on electricity because, we don't want to use gas anymore, the government tells us. So anyway, the evolution of things is accelerating at a fantastic rate. So here we are. Now I'm not going to go into that. What I'm going to go into is the text, and then I'm going to allow that essay that I wrote for you there. I'm allow that to kind of get into your system. We can come back to it if we get time, but I want to cover this material and the Mary material, these two scenes here today, and then next week we're going to get into the Johannine text. And this is appropriate because we're just getting closer and closer to Holy Week. Now, why is the goal of taking Lazarus? He is not part of the book of glory. Let's go over that again. There are two books. One book is the book of signs. That's chapters 1 to chapter 12. And so there you are. Then you have the book of glory, which is chapter 13 to the end, 21. In the sign book, you might think they're miracles, but they call them signs, because they point to something. In the sign book, there are 7 of them, the last 2 of which are the blind man and the dead man. And in the book of glory, you do not have the presentation that the synoptic gospels have. What do they call the events of Jesus in Jerusalem? The passion narrative. Patior is a Latin word that is reflexive. That means it comes back to you. And so what happens is patior means suffering comes to me. I suffer. See, so suffering comes to me. And so passus sum is that part of that word, which means that I have suffered. And so what it means is that it has come to you. So that's the passion narrative comes to Jesus. Now in John's gospel, we do not want to emphasize the death of Jesus and its horror and all the things that go with it, all the sinfulness that goes with it because of the high priest, because of Pontius Pilate, because of the apostles, because that's all in the synoptics. In the Gospel of John, what we get is glory. So will there be agony in the garden? No. Luke's Gospel, Jesus is sweating even blood, the hematidrosis, the blood things, coming out into through your pores and mixing with your sweat. So it's like you're bleeding, as he is out of anguish. So John doesn't have that. He has some things like that, but you can't escape crucifixion. If you see a Johannine cross, we have a crucifix in our minds. Well, we have a cross back there, and we have a crucifix down there. Yeah, there you are. And what do you see? You see the body of Christ. You see his title, King of the Jews, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, Rex Judaeorum in Latin. And so what you see is the agony there. See how that agony? Now, what you do to make that a Johannine cross is, first of all, you have Jesus stand up with his arms stretched out straight, like a priest at Mass or at prayer. See, okay, now do that. Then you put clothing on him, and the clothing is the clothing of a priest. So what you see in the Johannine cross is the emphasis, King of the Jews. But you also see Jesus crucified as the high priest. So what happens there is we get a sense that what John wants us to look at is not the passion that Jesus goes through, that we know that, but he wants us to see the glory that comes from it. That's why he calls it the hour of glory. In fact, the second book, chapter 13, verse 1 says this: Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father, and he loved his own to the fullest. The word is telos. Some people translate it to the end and they think that till he died. No, to the fullest. He loved them to the fullest. Then John goes into chapter 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 to tell you about the sermon that Jesus gives. We call it a discourse. The discourse that Jesus gives. He washes the disciples' feet. He does not celebrate the Eucharist. That doesn't mean he doesn't do it historically. It just means that John has already taken care of that in chapter 6 when he talked about the multiplication of the bread. So anyway, he has an essay on that. So anyway, so what we're dealing with is, and then Jesus gives this long, so what we have to do then is figure this out. If our whole time together has looked at the Jewish scriptures back in the fall, and then in the springtime we looked at these other scriptures, and then we looked at these theologians, what are we looking for? We're looking for thought and reflection on what happens after death. Well, if the best example in the gospel are twofold. One is Paul in Corinthians, where he says we are like a flower, a seed that goes into the ground that becomes a flower. And Jesus even uses that in chapter 12, getting ready for his death and resurrection. He says, unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground, it remains just a grain of wheat. But if it falls into the ground, then it produces much fruit. See what I mean? So what we're dealing with then is that in the Gospel of John, we want to get the account of why Jesus goes to his death, and then why he will have the longest description of his resurrection will be in the Gospel of John. And that this is our fourth gospel. Are you with me? Am I making sense? Okay, good. Write that down as your log for the day. You started to make some sense. So let's go to what is page 3. And you can see that where I got this from is the USCCB, United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. And when you hit that on the internet, it'll take you to their site. And one of the sites is Scripture. And so you hit that, books of the Bible. And it gives you all the books. And then what you do is you go to the gospel. It says John. So you hit on John. And what you get is these pages printed out for you. Well, not printed out, but these organized for you. So the reason I like these is because then I can write stuff in, annotate is what I call it. You can annotate the text. So let's take a look at this. Notice what I have here. Up at the top, Lazarus, 4 days in the tomb, the stone removed, wrapped in burial cloths. Jesus, 3 days in the tomb, inside power, blows it out through the Holy Spirit, cloths folded. See, so Lazarus we call a resuscitation. Jesus we call a resurrection. Lazarus returns to this life to die again. Jesus goes to eternal life. Now, it says the raising of Lazarus, Eleazar. I lived in Israel and on the backside of the Mount of Olives. And the bus stop right down below it was called El Lazaria. That was the sign up there, El Lazaria. Yeah, take me, because right down the road from there is where Lazarus was buried. So it just got this, even though this was kind of a Muslim area. It says, now a man was ill, Lazarus from Bethany at the village of Mary. See, now this is right outside of Jerusalem on the southeast side going towards Bethlehem. So it's east of Jerusalem. But notice what we get here is not talk about Jesus, and not talk about Lazarus, but we're talking about Jesus. It says Mary and her sister Martha lived there. Mary was the one who had anointed the Lord with perfumed oil, dried his feet with her hair. When did that happen? It'll happen days after this event. Let me go over that. After this event, they go to the home and they have a feast there, and Jesus is anointed with oil. And Jesus said, that's for my burial, because he's only days away from being crucified. So what I have there is, so in verse 2, you're thinking about Jesus. Now let's go over this again. 44 verses, one verse on Lazarus coming out of the tomb. So what do you think is happening here? The focus is really on Jesus. So this is kind of like a prelude. Now in Mark's gospel, we have a similar thing. We have a very long description of the death of John the Baptist in chapter 6. You're saying, oh my God, John the Baptist, he was some petty tyrant has him killed. Well, that's to get you ready for what happens to Jesus in Jerusalem. A petty tyrant, Pilate, gets Jesus killed. So anyway, that's a prelude. It was her brother Lazarus who was ill. So the sister sent word to him saying, Master, the one you love is ill. See, now the word for love, there's three different words for love. And so this love here is deep friendship, philein. Some say that is the beloved disciple. No, that's not true. But some say it, so I put it in there. The beloved disciple is a unique figure. When Jesus heard this, said, this illness is not to end in death, but the glory of God. See how that word glory comes in? Well, what did Jesus say back at the wedding feast of Cana? His mother says, get them some wine. He says, Mother, he says, my hour has not yet come. But as a sign that I can do things, he gives them 150 gallons of wine. That's what these 6 jars would hold. Now, I wanted to do some research one time. So I said, let's see if I can drink 150 gallons of wine. And I got up right, I think, to 139 and a half. But I had to go to the bathroom. So anyway, but that's something, for a party. And they mixed it with water, so it even got to be more. So when Jesus said, this is not to end in death, but the glory, Son of may be glorified. We're going to get that word. What does that word mean? It means that when Jesus is in the resurrected state, he is in glory, like the transfiguration. He is not in his humanity being displayed as much as the divinity being displayed. So Jesus reigns in heaven as glory. He's glorified. He said, this illness is not to end in death. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister. Now, notice, see, the word for love there is agapon, agape. That's love for everyone. So, in other words, Jesus loves them, but not in a selective fashion that excludes everybody else. In fact, the word, if you read it in Greek, includes everybody else. So, when he heard this, he was ill. He remained for 2 days in the place where he was. See, so why does he stay there? I thought, oh my God, I didn't tell you where he was. You would think he'd be rushing to Lazarus' spot of illness, wouldn't you? Yes. Thank you for your understanding. Where is Jesus? You have to have a mental map in mind. Think of us, kind of a rectangle. A rectangle, okay? Okay, and so this is the city of Jerusalem. Now down to the east, so let's see, this would be the west. Down to the east of Jerusalem are canyons, go all the way down deep into the earth, the lowest spot of the surface there, and then there's a river. And that river is the Jordan River. And below the Jordan River is the Dead Sea. It pours into there, and then it just gets salty because there's no escape. It just boils for centuries. So Jesus is over there on the east side of the Jordan River. So he has to cross over the river, and that's not difficult. Then he has to go up through all the canyons. And then he gets up to Bethlehem, and then he turns back here to get to, if this is Jerusalem, he's going to be over on the east side, and that's going to be over here. So southwest side. So it's going to be over here. So that's what he has to do. So now it says he stays where he is 2 more days. So you would think that he would start out because it's going to take him at least a day to get up there, and Lazarus is very ill. And I put down there pre-knowledge. We're going to find out that Jesus is prophetic. He knows what has happened is Lazarus has died. See, the disciples don't know that, but Lazarus died. And then he said, let's go back to Judea. The disciples said, Rabbi, and this is the last time they call him that, the Jews were just trying to stone you. And wow, yeah, they were. And Jesus said, aren't there 12 hours in a day? Why does he mention light here? Well, that's because of the genius of the gospel writer picks up on what Jesus said here, because he wants to show you that what did he just do? He just put a blind man back into sight, and now he's going to put a dead man into life. So he mentions that. He sees the light of this world. Jesus, of course, he did that because he had just cured a blind man. Verse 10, but if he walks at night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. And then verse 11. So having said this, he says, our friend Lazarus is asleep, but I'm going to awaken him. Now, that's a euphemism for death, to say that he's asleep. We even say that in our Eucharistic prayer. So let's continue. Turn the page. We're moving here, and we're up on verse 12. So Jesus said, Master, if he's asleep, you'll be saved. In other words, just, some orange juice. So the crisis of illness is past. See, he's, in other words, he'd be recovered. And Jesus knows this. Jesus was talking about his death. He says, Lazarus has died. And I'm glad that I was with you. And I say, no, why does he say that? That he's glad that Lazarus died? No. He says, I was glad I was with you. Well, Lazarus has died, but I'm glad I was with you because it gives us the opportunity to see a week before I die that I am in control of life and death so that you may believe. So let us go to him. So Thomas, called Didymus, said to his fellow disciples, let us go with him to die with him. See, he's the most courageous of the apostles. He says, we're going to go to die with him. So then Jesus arrived. He found Lazarus been in the tomb 4 days. See, all these things are important. These things about the days and the stone and everything like that. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles away, about 1.75 miles. Okay, that's good. Many of the witnesses come to Martha and Mary to comfort them about their brother. So this is usually what happens. You die, they immediately wash your body, put you into a shroud, and then place you in the tomb. And then for about 30 days, maybe even longer, people come to visit you like a wake. So they'll stop things, what they're doing. We have that in the United States, Shiva. If you go up to Skokie, people are doing Shiva all the time. Somebody dies, and so for the next week or so, you bring over some egg salad or some other type dish or something like that, so the people there get some refreshment. That's the custom. Do you know what it costs now if you wanted to get a burial spot on the Mount of Olives? Because they say that it's a stepping stone to heaven. Take a guess. Well, that's very close. $50,000. And it's jam-packed, so. Now, verse 18, Bethany is near Jerusalem. Many of the Jews have come out. Martha heard that Jesus comes, so she runs to meet him. And she goes to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. See, now go to Ezekiel 8:14. Women in mourning sit on the floor of the house. Why? So why does this gospel writer pick that up? Instead of saying Mary was at home, just saying Mary sat at home. Because he's got Ezekiel in mind. You say, oh, come on. I'm telling you, that's exactly what's happened. These things are loaded with layers of meaning. Martha said, Lord, if you had been my brother or not, but even now I know that whatever you ask God will give you. Jesus said, your brother will rise. Now, this word that rise is using is anastasis. And this is the word that Paul uses a lot to talk about the resurrection of Jesus. So if the Greek of here is that your brother will rise, Jesus is saying he will rise, like Paul says, if we die with Christ, we shall rise with Christ. We say that at funeral rites when we get to the gravesite. We say that we know that if we die like so, we have that in our Eucharistic prayer. If you die like Christ, you will rise with Christ. So Martha said, I know he will rise in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said, I am the resurrection and life. Whoever believes in me, even if he dies, will live. Now, this is a very significant passage because the Gospel of John does not use the word apostles. It uses the word disciples, and we have a beloved disciple. We've talked about him a little bit. And so one of the things that happens about this, when it says, I know he will rise, Martha said to him. Incredible. Who is the one who you think in the Synoptic Gospels that Jesus will talk to about his resurrection? Obviously, Peter, the leader of the apostles, correct? Here you have, and I put this in the sideline, Martha is given the revelation of the resurrection. So it's a woman who is in the Gospels who's telling us that Jesus will rise from the dead. And even if he dies, now this means a physical death, not a spiritual death. And so if everyone who lives and believes in me will never die, do you believe in this? See, the believer who is alive spiritually will have life spiritually, live spiritually. She said, yes, Lord, I've come to believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who's coming into the world. See, Peter would say that in chapter 16 of Matthew's Gospel. Martha says it here in verse 26. Okay, turn the page. We're making progress here. We're up to verse 20. When she had said this, she went and called. Her sister says, the teacher is here, is asking for you. See, John likes that word, the teacher. He's used it before in chapter 3, chapter 10, chapter 13, and chapter 14. As soon as she heard this, she rose quickly and went to him. For Jesus had not yet come into the village, you still were Martha had met him. Well, that's obvious because you do not bury someone in the city. Remember that's the whole thing about the wall, you know, of maybe I better stop at that. Somebody on TV a couple of weeks ago said that the Gospels were wrong, that Jesus did not rise from the dead because he was not crucified outside the wall, but crucified inside the wall. So therefore, it's a hoax. This man was very proud of himself that he found out that little fact. And you just have to use your imagination. The whole city of Jerusalem, as I showed you, is like something like this. But there's a corner over here. See on the west side, there's a corner over here that has an indentation in the wall. They built another wall around it though in the year 44. So this fellow, I didn't say doofus because I don't want to get personal, but this unknowing person on TV said, "Oh no, the thing about Jesus is he was not crucified outside the city. That means he wasn't crucified. It didn't take place." No, it's just because Jesus went out there and that was there, and then the place where he's buried is out there too, and then that was enclosed in the year 44 as a defense wall was built. They didn't call me when they were making this TV program, and so let's continue. Now we get to the key. These next couple of verses are the key to the whole passage. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who come to her, he became perturbed and deeply troubled. Now, this I put down there is an articulate expression of anger. See, we know that what verse 35 says, and Jesus wept. We use that in our funeral liturgies. Jesus wept for Lazarus, friends, so he's going to weep for us too when we're buried. And so what does he mean by that? Is that Jesus wept? You have to take the language that is being used here, that he is perturbed. Now I put it over in the left-hand side there. He was so perturbed that he sounded like a horse that had reared up its legs and was snorting in anger. Let's say you got a whip out there and you whip the face of the horse, and it would lean back like this and put its legs up and it kind of make a deep growling kind of a noise. That was pretty good, was it not? Okay. Yes. Well, I see from in the back there they have 8.7. Okay, we're doing pretty good. You see what I mean? Is this position of Jesus with this is he's coming into the realm of Satan. Where did death come into the world? From Satan, from the book of Genesis. That was the punishment he had for turning his back on God, that you would die. And so what happens here is Jesus is now in Satan's territory with his friend Lazarus. And so what he does is he's deeply, deeply troubled. Here it says, angered, perturbed, snorting like a horse, deeply troubled, angry at man's at the manifestations of Satan's kingdom of evil. I put in the right-hand side there. So Jesus comes to see the light, whereas people come to see the abode of darkness and death, because Lazarus is dead and he's in a dark tomb. So Jesus weeps. He weeps over the tomb. See how he loved him. Remember, Jesus in Luke's gospel, came to Jerusalem, sat on the Mount of Olives, looked over to the Holy of Holies across the valley, and he cried. He says, how many times I would have gathered you like a mother hen gathers her chickens. But some of them said, could not this been one of the blind man? See, we get that kind of, this is just beautiful writing, because what we have is like an undercurrent, this blind man coming back to us. That Jesus did something before. This is like symphonic music. That's my best comparison I can come up with about Johannine writing. It's a symphony. You get themes coming back at you, from the violins and from the oboes and from the violins and the cellos and stuff. That's just magnificent. And so anyway, he said he'd cure the blind man. Well, that's what happened. He says in the prologue, he says he's going to cure a blind man. He's going to bring light and life. So Jesus, perturbed again for 38. See, John doesn't let you forget that. He came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone lay across it. Now, some would say this, and I agree with them, that this is a vertical tomb. You know, we have in the movies these, you know, with the resurrection of Jesus, a large circular stone, you know, that they would have a trench in the front. Well, that was an expensive man's stone because that's very big. Remember, it was Joseph of Arimathea, you know, a millionaire. It was his burial place. So anyway, so he would roll down that stone and would settle in there. This is a chamber. So what you have to do, now think of our stairway here, and you'll have, I think, pretty much the exact distance. We would be in the tomb. And from the floor where you came down the steps, that would be the entranceway into the underground tomb. So the stone that would be across it would be across the top of it there. Them help you. So somewhere over there, in the last table over there, the most lively of people we have, by the way, you know, you are the tomb. You can go down into it now. You can go you can walk down the stairway and come to an area, and then you will see what all this is. So anyway, Jesus said, take away the stone. They said, no, you can't do that because of the fact that he will, the smell of death will be there. But that's why they put myrrh on you. Remember, myrrh given to Jesus at his birth in Matthew's gospel, they gave myrrh and frankincense, myrrh and gold. The frankincense for prayer, and gold for divinity, and myrrh for his burial. So here it is. And so there's no embalming. They just wash it. Now they had to, when Jesus, the body still is exuding blood and sweat, and it will for some time after they even place him in the tomb in the shroud. So, and they have to, all this is in a hurry. That's why they come back on Sunday morning, so that they can finish the job of cleaning the body. Jesus said, didn't I tell you, if you believe, you'll see the glory of God? So they took away the stone, and Jesus raised his eyes and said, Father, I thank you. See, that's just a natural prelude for Jesus to pray, is to look skyward. Let's turn the page. I know that you always hear me, but because of the crowd, I've said this, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, he cried out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. Now, what I do is I make something out of that word, shout. He cried out in a loud voice. I would say shout. And I put it down there. I wrote it in for you there. The verb that they're using is kraugesein. And that is the same verb that they're using for the crowd at Jesus' trial. So this is the ultimate irony. John likes irony. Irony means that you do something that you don't know what you're doing. So when Jesus is on trial before Pilate, what's his Pilate do? He brings out Jesus, said, here is the man. Doesn't he realize, you know, this is the Son of Man? And we're going to get another irony here in just a minute. But here you have the thing here that he is coming out of the tomb, and they had a shout. So what Jesus is doing is he's shouting, and a man comes out of the tomb into life. At the trial of Jesus, the crowd shouts to put Jesus to death. So what you have there is irony, because they're shouting for Jesus to his death because they don't know what they're saying. If they knew that Jesus had the power over life and death, they wouldn't be shouting to crucify him. They would be shouting something else, but they're shouting this anger now to put him to death. And so the dead man came out, tied. Now this is verse 44. Do you notice that? This is finally we get to meet Lazarus. You would think that would be in the center of the section there because it's the most important thing, but it's not. So he comes out, burial bands and hand and feet, face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said, untie him, let him go. And that's the end. See, John is not interested in what we would be. We would have one of the TV stations. I can't say CNN because we don't know whether they tell us. They're too religious for them, I think. Although when I lived in the Middle East, it was in the 90s, we paid attention to CNN all the time because that was the one TV station that you had that was broadcasting. They had wonderful broadcasters, very truthful. So anyway, so what's happening is that Jesus is bringing somebody back to life. It's the end of the scene. We would be asking all kind of questions. Where'd you go? What'd you see? What'd you do? Was there food? Did you feed anybody? We'd have all kind of things. Were you asleep? So that's the end of it. Now we get to the conclusion of this. And this whole scene here is a giant chiasm. And the center of the chiasm is the next section. You would think that Lazarus coming out of the tomb would be the most important thing about the Lazarus event, would you not? It's just natural. But the center of this whole thing is what is going to be the conclusion of Jesus raising someone from the dead. And that's what we come across next. So let's take a look. Now, many of the Jews who had come to Mary, remember she had anointed Jesus, and seen what he had done, began to believe in him. That's helpful to know, is that this is the Jesus in the Jerusalem area now is performing miracles, and people are putting their faith in him. So it said, many of the Jews who had come to Mary, seeing what she had done, began to believe in him. But some went to the Pharisees, told them what Jesus had done. So the chief priests of the Pharisees convened. Now, convened means that they came together. I put down there are scribes and elders and priests in the Sanhedrin. And many of them were Pharisees by trade. That's a type of spirituality. They were very devout people. The Pharisees gave extra money in their donations. They put in extra time to help people. The one thing they did not do is to rescue people. Remember that parable of the Good Samaritan? The priests, Pharisees, went on the right side. Why? Because if they touch the guy, then he dies. Then they have to go into ritual purification for several days before they can go to the worship in the temple or in a synagogue. So they just stay away from them. So these Pharisees get a bad rap in the Gospels. But the other Pharisees criticize the Pharisees too. So anyway, and there's 70 of them, and there's a holding tank of 70 other people. So if one guy dies, and they're all men, so if one guy dies, then you just go to number one of the reserve 70, put him in there. So I always have 70, plus the high priest. So they come before this now. And I won't get into this. I've given over years and years and years ago, I went through the trials of Jesus. So that's absolutely fascinating material. If we leave him alone and people believe in him, the Romans will come and take away both our land and our nation. You see, because the other party to the Pharisees, which was the larger crowd, was the more powerful crowd, which was the Sadducees. Sadducees, Sadduc, from ages past, Sadducees. And the Sadducees did not believe in the afterlife, for one thing. And they ran, and Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, was a Sadducee. Now, this is actually too delicious for us to think. You have Caiaphas in the next verse. The chief priests convened, we leave alone. One of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. See, now Annas was the high priest right around the time of Jesus' birth. And then 5 of his sons became high priests, one after another, because the Romans would throw them out. And then they get a bribe and they put that next one in. It's like Chicago. Well, I didn't say that. I didn't mean to. So anyway. So he ran out of sons, but he had a daughter who was married to Caiaphas. So his son-in-law became the high priest that year. Now, catch the irony of this. Who is Jesus on the cross? The high priest. He's going to heaven as the high priest. Remember the book of Revelation. He's Hebrews, the letter of Hebrews. He's the high priest. That means he is the sacrifice. He is both the sacrificer and the sacrifice. He gives up his life. And so what happens here is that Jesus, who is the high priest of the universe, is coming before some little petty potentate in far off Israel in the Mediterranean in the year 30. He's going to die on April 7th. So anyway, there you are. Isn't that ironical? You know, that this pipsqueak is going to be putting the savior of the world to death. So he says, Caiaphas says, you know nothing. Do you consider it's better for you that one man die? See, that's the irony. Yes, it is better that Jesus die instead of the people, so the whole nation may not perish, because the Sadducees made a lot of connections with the Romans. And you know how that goes. It's the old Chicago handshake. They give you, there's always something in it. And so they get along with each other. And the typical Roman thing is to have the locals take care of their own, leadership. And so the Romans would be offended here, if Caiaphas is saying something and he says and is not paid attention to. He did not say this on his own, but since he was high priest for the area, he prophesied that Jesus is going to die for the nation. I put down there, that's the ultimate irony. See how John phrases it, exactly what takes place. Jesus did save the nation, not only for the nation, but also to gather into one the dispersed children of God. So from that day on, they planned to kill him. So Jesus could not walk around in public. He left the region for the desert to a town called Ephraim, and there he remained with his disciples. That was up north of Jerusalem. Okay, are you satisfied with our text here? Like I say, 44 verses, one text, a man comes out of the tomb. But the key to it is that the effect of that is as Jesus raises us from the dead, somebody is there to put us to death in Jesus. Now, we have another section that we're going to take showing the glory of Jesus. And this will be Jesus on the cross in the Gospel of John. We do not get much in the synoptics. We get the famous Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? That is a psalm that goes back and forth between why have you forsaken me and I love you, God, because you have loved me from my birth. Let's just read a little bit from Psalm 22. This is the synoptics. We're going to go into the Gospel of John. This is a comparison. It's not printed for you. I'm just going to have to read it for you. It's a Psalm 22. It's an aside, so it's not part of our. So let's continue. My God, why have you abandoned me? Why so far from my call for help, from my cries of anguish? My God, I call out to you by day, and you do not answer by night, and I have no relief. See, what's that say to you? Jesus is in anguish. My God, are you leaving me too? However, I told you it's a dialogue back and forth. Let's go to verse 4, 5, and 6. Yet you are enthroned as the Holy One. You are the glory of Israel, talking to the Father. And you, our ancestors, trusted. They trusted you to rescue them. To you they cried out and they escaped. And you they trusted and were not disappointed. You see how that goes? He's just said, my God, why have you abandoned me? They said, but we've trusted you in the past and you've always helped. Let's go to verses 8 and 9. But I am a worm, hardly human, scorned by everyone, despised by the people. All see me, mock me. They curl their lips and jeer. They shake their heads at me. You relied on the Lord. Let him deliver you. If he loves you, let him rescue you. That sounds like the bottom of life, doesn't it? I'm a worm, not a man. However, let's go to verses 10, 11, and 12. Yet you drew me forth from the womb, made me safe at my mother's breast. Upon you I was thrust from the womb. Since birth you are my God. Do not stay far from me, for trouble is near, and there's no one to help. Isn't that beautiful? There's no one to help. You are my God. So you see how this is going? And it goes that way all the way through the whole psalm that Jesus describes, or the psalm describes. And this one was a psalm written, since it's Psalm 22, it means it was written by David. So that's around 950 years before the time of Christ. Now this is in the Synoptic Gospels. Many bulls, I'm going to go 14 to 19. Many bulls surround me. Fierce bulls of Bashan encircle me. They open their mouths against me, lions that rend and roar. Like water, my life drains away. My bones are grow soft. My heart has become like wax. It melts within me. As dry as potsherd is my throat. My tongue sticks to my palate. You lay me in the dust of death. Many dogs surround me. A pack of evildoers closes in. I'm so wasted my hands and feet that I can count all my bones. They stare at me and gloat. They divide my garments among them. From my clothing they cast lots. See that? They roll dice for his very expensive priestly outfit. Well, that sounds pretty bad, isn't it? The bulls of Bashan. Bashan is Golan Heights. They're the biggest bulls in the Mideast. Let's go to verse 20, 21, and 22. But you, Lord, do not stay far off. My strength come quickly to help me. Deliver me from the sword, my forlorn life from the teeth of the dog. Save me from the lion's mouth, my poor life in the horns of wild bulls. Now, that gives you an idea what the synoptics do with Jesus on the cross, this anguish. Not in the Gospel of John. In the Gospel of John, we're dealing with glory. Jesus is the high priest. He is the king. He's going to be buried like a king. Now, we don't get into that text, but let's take a look. What do I mean by that? When it comes time for his burial, who takes him down from the cross? Well, his mother and Mary Magdalene, the others that are there, the women take him down. They take his body, put it in a cloth to carry. They're going to carry it about 100 yards, like to the edge of our parking lot out here. And that's where the tomb is of a very well-to-do man, Joseph of Arimathea. And what happens is he is given the tomb over to Jesus. Nobody's been buried in it. And they also would take and put a separate face thing over Jesus, even though he's in a shroud. They put a face thing over because you still exude fluids coming out of you. And they don't want to have any of Jesus' blood be dropping on the ground and things like that. They want to have everything covered. That's why in the tomb there is the shroud folded and also the headcloth folded. So the shroud has the face of Jesus because that's when they put the shroud over. But this cloth that's folded over there is this cloth to keep from having droppings go as they go. I hope I'm doing that justice. So anyway, and as part of the experience then is that they carry with them, and this is so unusual, 100 pounds of burial dust of myrrh and other things, which is expensive in itself. What is going on here? I think, and that's just my thought, that what they're doing is they're taking some from the supply that Joseph of Arimathea has for his family of very well-to-do ointments that you're going to place on the body before complete burial. That's what my interpretation is. You see what I mean? To bury a king with that amount of stuff means he's a king. To marry a pauper is, most of them crucified, they would throw them into the side trash on a highway because the animals, the wolves and the dogs, their dogs were like wolves, would come and consume the bodies. I don't know. Now let's go to what we have here is the next section. And we did this a year ago, so some of you might remember this, but I picked it out again for us. I'll go 2 pages, go to page 1 of session 19. And we have plenty of time to cover this. Reflection opens for Mary at the foot of the cross. Because what happens at the foot of the cross is going to be important for us. Because it will tell us something about eternal life. Why is it important to see the ghastly crucifixion scene with the body of Jesus revealed? That's what we should know about this. I think it's because of the fact that we are emphasizing Jesus' humanity. Now, in the Gospel of John, the abuse that Jesus takes is not highlighted. They do mention the piercing of the side. They do mention his clothing being taken off. In the synoptics, how does Jesus prepare his disciples for the coming events of the last days in Jerusalem? Go to Mark chapter 8. Jesus says, I am going to Jerusalem to be handed over to evil men. They will crucify me, and in 3 days I will rise. Go to chapter 9. Jesus says a second time, I am going to be handed over to evil men, and they will kill me, and I will rise. Chapter 10, third time. Jesus says, this is they get close to Jerusalem, says, I will be handed over to evil men, they will kill me, and I will rise. So that's how he gets them ready. This is a famous thing in Mark's gospel. 3 times over, Jesus telling them what's going to happen. They do not accept it. Next, in John, how does Jesus prepare his disciples for the events of the last hours? Well, he gives a discourse. And notice what I put down. See John chapters 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. That is a lengthy, and that's what we're going to get into next week, a lengthy discourse. And the discourse is on Jesus with his disciples on the walk to the garden. Now, notice that when we say agony in the Garden of Gethsemane, but the agony is in Luke's gospel where he sweats blood. The Gethsemane is in Mark's gospel because his family owns part of the land there. That's where the Last Supper was, in Mark's house over on the west side. And the garden, so we say the agony of the Garden of Gethsemane, but the Gethsemane is in Mark and Matthew. The suffering comes in Luke. The garden comes in John. He mentions it a garden. Why? Because it reminds us of the Garden of Eden where all of this started. It all started in the Garden of Eden when mankind turned their back on God and therefore went in through death. So that's why Jesus is here in the garden. Sometimes you will see in medieval paintings the crucifix of Jesus painted, and down below you will have a skull, and they will say that's the skull of Adam. There is even a tradition that in one of the chambers down below where the Holy Sepulchre is, and you can go down there and they have a chapel of Adam, and it is supposedly the same idea, that here you have Adam, the sin maker, and Jesus, the sin healer, all in the same place. That is not part of our theology as much as it is a tradition. It says, I thought that John was charged to find Mary a place to live and take care of her needs. Is that all there is? In other words, is that why and I call it John here because that's the way everybody calls it. But actually the person there is not John. So we'll get into that. And so it was that he was supposed to take care of Mary. And that's all there is. And we're going to find out, no. Mary becomes the new Eve, the queen of heaven. And the beloved disciple is the human race, which includes us. We are present in the gospel in the beloved disciple. So for me to use John there was an inaccuracy. Now that happens. I remember it distinctly. It was March 13th, 1978. I made a mistake. And yes, now here I waited all these years and another. Well, let's go. Make the connection between Our Lady and the beloved disciples of today. See, Mary remains as the Queen of Heaven, and we are the disciples of today. We have devotion to Our Lady. Why? Because Jesus has said so. This is your mother, and you are the son and daughters of the mother. Do we miss something essential to our faith by not having some focus on Mary? Yeah, sure. It's a very essential part of our faith. So let's turn the page 2. How to read Mary at the foot of the cross. Jesus speaks 7 times. This is a famous book, and I've recommended it to people highly, even though it was written in the 1950s and is a long book. And it's a Fulton Sheen, Bishop Fulton Sheen's book on the life of Christ, because he is a thorough biblical scholar. And he will have things in there that predated some of the last great flow of theology of the church was in the 90s and the early 2010 and stuff like that. We still have alive with us today some of the great scholars of the world. We've had others have died but the Vatican Council. So anyway, and it's a fabulous book. And and he has a section in there, and he even wrote like a pamphlet kind of a form of this, the famous 7 last words or statements. They come from the different gospels and things like that. So it's not just John. They are subject of books and devotions as the giving of his life to bring us all to eternal life. It's one of the central focal points of our faith and is honored in every church with a representation of the crucifix. Other denominations tend to put a cross without the corpus, but our Catholic tradition is to display the reality of death on a cross and its horror in its movement to faith. So here is the text I printed up there for just so we could read it. But standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. And there's some debate as to whether or not that's 3 or 4 people. Clopas, you might remember, is actually mentioned in Luke's gospel as being a couple, 2 people going home from Jerusalem on the way to Emmaus. My contention is that it is the wife of Clopas. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved. Now, see that I didn't underline that. I should have. That is the beloved disciple. So the person who is at the cross is the beloved disciple. Here's something startling. There are 2 heroes in the Gospel of John. Now, I could say the synoptics, and you would say readily, the heroes are Jesus and Peter and the apostles. So those would be the 2 heroes. In other words, coming out of the synoptic Gospels, you get the apostles and Jesus. But in the Gospel of John, the two heroes are the woman and the beloved disciple, and neither is given a name. Both of them stand for corporate collectivities. Let's get into that. I told you that'd be astounding. Am I correct? Yes. Well, yes. Okay. That kind of, I'm going to have to go back in my diary, March 13th, 1978, and scratch it out saying, but I corrected myself. Woman, behold your son. So I see whom he loves standing there. He said to his mother, so there's no question about who it is. It's his mother. Woman, behold your son. Now, she only appears twice in the Gospels, and the first time was at the wedding feast of Cana, where Jesus again calls her woman. Now, the Gospel says she is Mary, said Mary was there, his mother. But Jesus calls her woman. So this is very high, this is what we call high theology, which is we're not as interested in the event, although it took place, as we are in the meaning of the event. So it's the meaning of the event is that the woman is there with the beloved disciple. He said, behold your mother. And from that hour, the disciple took her to his own home. Now that word took is kind of like a stronger word than just to take her and leave her, but it is to like possess her in a positive sense. In other words, be her guide and her guard. After this, Jesus, knowing that it was all finished, said to fulfill the scripture, I thirst. That's from Psalm 69. A bowl full of vinegar stood there. Vinegar is sour wine. And they put a sponge full of vinegar on hyssop. And notice that it's hyssop that they use. And held it to his mouth. Then he said, it is finished. He bowed his head and gave up his spirit. So why do I say that it's important for hyssop? Remember, Jesus dies as the Lamb of God. In the account that John gives, he has a different counting for the days, which is all possible. And I could explain. There's a book written on it by Henri Joubert in 1960 on the date of the Last Supper. I don't want to get into that because it's too complicated. But it's just true that when John does it, it is the preparation day for Passover. And so at noontime, the time of the crucifixion, the lambs are being slain in the temple and around the countryside because there were maybe 200,000 people there at this time. The town has tripled in size. And so what you have is, as the Passover lamb is being sacrificed, Jesus is dying on the cross. What did John say, the Gospel John say, when Jesus came the very first day? He says, there is the Lamb of God. What else about Jesus? He doesn't have any bones broken. The others will have their bones broken because they have to get them off the cross. So they take a baseball bat kind of club and they break their shin bones. And so the bones penetrate through your skin and you just sag down, you can't breathe. So you die. They come to Jesus and he's dead. So they put a spear into his side and blood and water comes out. And so you have this. And then the other item is that they take a branch of hyssop to put the sponge on. Now, the cross would not be like we think in a Cecil B. DeMille movie, way up high. The cross might be like our crucifix back there. It might be right there at ground level or just a little bit above it so people could see, but they didn't have great big huge numbers there. Sometimes the vertical thing would be there permanently and the bar would go across it. So it depends on which one they use. So you recognize the hyssop branch though. Remember back in Egypt, they were told to slay the lamb, takes the lamb's blood and take a branch of hyssop and put it over the door so that when the angel came, the avenging angel came, it would see the blood over the doorway to the Israelites. So their oldest son was preserved, whereas the oldest son of the Egyptians were killed, along with the oldest of the animals were killed. So when they say, they tell you what the stick is that they use to put the sponge up to Jesus, and they call it hyssop. It's because of the fact that the genius behind John is to always reflect back on the fulfillment of things. And this is a fulfillment that the lamb that is sacrificed at the hour of the lamb sacrificing and no bones broken and branch of hyssop tell you that this is Jesus, the Lord. Now, Let's continue here with our commentary. And to do that, I'm going to go to the next page, which is in larger print. Now, the previous page that I had written an essay for was on Lazarus. And that could be some reading if you like to keep up with us. That could be some nice reading for you during the week. It would just refresh you about, we took the full text first before we did the reading, but that could be a good summary for you. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use a book by a writer named Petra. And he is writing about Mary and the Old Testament. And I've used a lot of his work here, and I quote some of his material about Mary at the cross. So let's read this. These are the only words of the cross seen directly addressed to a follower of his. Petra makes an anatomical statement about the difficulty of one being asphyxiated to speak because of the strength needed to lift oneself up from the sagging position on the cross, with the only leverage being the nailed flesh. In other words, he's saying that it's not easy for Jesus to die, that what he has to do in order to say what he said, because he's near death, in order to say what he said, he has to push himself up through the nails and through the agony of everything, because he's just contorting in physical tribulations because of the fact that every muscle in his body is cramped. And so there's no relief of pain anywhere, you're just cramped. And so what he has to do is push himself up. And then he makes this statement about Mary: here is your son, and the woman, here is your son, and through the disciple, here is your mother. And then he lowers his head and dies. So he makes a statement to that, just to get us into the mood of the recognition here. Next paragraph. Jesus' words to Mary, the beloved disciple, are in the form of a last will and testament. Jesus had already spoken to his disciples in John's recording over 5 full chapters in the Last Supper discourse. The only thing Jesus has for possession, even his clothes, were in others' hands, was his mother, and he gives her away. So this is an incredible statement. See, Petra is a current theological scriptural analyst, and his books are getting kind of rave reviews because he does talk about things behind the scenes like that we wouldn't have thought about before. That here Jesus, in his interpretation, is giving away his mother to humanity. And not saying, mother, we're going to heaven together, but to say, I give humanity over to you and you over to humanity. So he dies in complete poverty. His words are a statement of adoption, a legal matter to some. Mary takes John to her adoptive son, and John takes Mary to be his adopted mother. Now they use John for this, as you will. You'll find all the popes and all the other writers are always using this word John as the beloved disciple. And they say he is the author of the book, and we are disputing that. We are disputing that precisely because you cannot ignore the fact of the beloved disciple. Go to the Last Supper. And it says at the Last Supper, because they are laying on couches. I could lay down here, but that might take too much time, and not to mention trying to get up again. So, with your feet out, towards the edge and your head towards the middle, and right next to Jesus, facing that way, is John, the beloved disciple, I should say, correct? And the beloved disciple leans back and puts his head on Jesus' chest, and the reason for that is so that the head of the beloved disciple is over the beating heart of Jesus. We have a devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. That's exactly what's happening here. Otherwise, why would they tell you about it? And then as Jesus is looking out there, so is the beloved disciple looking out there, in other words, to the world beyond this particular dinner. So what's happening here, that's the first time, the second time we get the beloved disciple, because at the initial statement of Jesus at the River Jordan, John the Baptist said, "There's the Lamb of God." And Andrew and a disciple, 2 disciples, both of them unnamed, went to see Jesus. Well, one of those is the beloved disciple. Then we get the Last Supper. Then we get the experience of the tomb. Peter and the beloved disciple run down to the tomb. It's about a 2-mile run. And the beloved disciple is there. The beloved disciple is not at the blessing in the evening, because he doesn't have to be, but he is at the lakeside in Galilee. At the very end, it said, he was the one in the boat who said, the beloved disciple said, there is the Lord. And Peter jumps in the water. And the gospel finally ends with the beloved disciple being blessed by Jesus. So this beloved disciple is a stand-in for some representation person outside of the apostles that is a stand-in for the human race. Just as his mother is called not Mary, but is called Eve, the mother, woman. See, so that word woman means that she includes all humanity. So let's continue to read. Peter quotes this, quotes a Protestant scholar, John Culpeper, with these words. I actually studied with Culpeper in Washington many years ago. From the cross, Jesus sees his mother and the beloved disciple standing nearby. With simple statement, gives the beloved disciple as a son to his mother and gives his mother to the beloved disciple. By this ceremonial act, a new relationship is formed, a new family is created. Joseph is an example as one with an adopted fatherhood to Jesus. So this is a reality of a relationship, not just worry about caring for someone. So in other words, the beloved disciple becomes the adoptive child of Mary, just as Jesus was the child of Mary. Now the woman has a child. The woman is the people of God, has a child now, the beloved disciple. The disciple took her to his own home. We might think of this as a geographical place. For example, the Acts of the Apostles said that Mary with the apostles gathered Jerusalem awaiting the Pentecost. The other hand, the Greek word for home is not used, but the phrase that he took Mary to his own place. The word idea indicates a broader term as one's own family, people, and possession. So to take Mary into his own means I take you into our humanity. So these are just reflections. So let's continue. Jesus came to his own. We turn to page 4. In other words, the beloved disciple is not just to house Mary, but to treat her as his actual mother. He's now actually her son. See, that's why he says this is like a legal type thing of adoption, because it's not like he just goes out and gets food for her and puts if there's leaks in the roof and takes care of the stuff. No. It means something much wider. So after giving Mary away, Jesus can now say all is now finished, and he lays down his life. So John's gospel is a spiritual gospel that covers layers of meaning and events and spoken words. These words of behold take on a wider spiritual meaning. The beloved disciple is not named, and one aspect of that reality is he is indeed an ideal figure. His example is what every disciple should be. Recall the Last Supper discourse. So one of the last questions we have here is, what does it mean to be a beloved disciple today? It means precisely, thank God for this Gospel of John, that we are included in all of these events of salvation. A beloved disciple was there at that time. We, the beloved disciple, are now with Jesus the Lord at our present time. Mary, the mother of the Lord, becomes the mother of the faithful. Beloved disciple here seems to denote the ideal Christian convert. Wow. So that is our material for today. Well, we have another page. That clock is too fast. It's a class by a minute. So to all who received him and believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor the will of man, but of God. Well, that's beautiful because that comes from the prologue. The prologue was written after the gospel was written. So what it means is that all who were born not by blood or by will of the flesh, but because they are disciples of Jesus, they are now the children of God. The consequences is that every beloved disciple should take Mary to be his or her own mother. Origen of Alexandria writes this: the first fruits of the gospel is that according to John, see, he uses John, but I would say beloved disciple, whose meaning no one can understand, who has not leaned on Jesus' breast nor received Mary from Jesus to be his mother also. See, he picks up that idea too, that leaning on Jesus is leaning on Jesus' heart. To be dramatic, Jesus' dying wishes for Mary to become the mother of all Christians. This happens, and the new beloved disciple begins to know Jesus better. So that's Peter's book, Jesus and the Jewish Roots of Mary. Okay, now there are some readings, and I do have a couple of pages there from Fulton Sheen, so you get some kind of a flavor to it. And I have some other articles and things like that too. And I also have something about how to read the prologue. And so we're going to get into that material next week. Did I wear you out today or? Okay. And how about our Zoomers? Now let's have a hand for our Zoomers. There you go. Yeah, everybody's happy for you here. And of course, who puts this all together and makes it all happen for us? Our own Stephanie. So now if you have any questions on the way out the door, I'll be right at the back there, or any observations you want to make.
Thank you, Father Bob.
You're welcome.